Cirque du Freak, a living nightmare. This will have my commentary throughout the chapters. Chapter 26. Mr. Krebsley led the way up the stairs and out of the building. He walked confidently through the darkness. I thought I could see a bit better than I could when coming in, but that might just have been because my eyes were used to the dark, not because of the vampire blood in my veins. He just came from a basement which had lighting. He can see in the dark, probably because he's half vampire. Once outside, he told me to hop up on his back. Keep your arms wrapped around my neck, he said. Do not let go or make any sudden movements. As I was getting up, I looked down and saw he was wearing slippers. I thought it was strange but didn't say anything. When I was on his back, he started running. I didn't notice anything strange at first, but soon began to realize how fast buildings were zipping by. Mr. Krebsley's legs didn't seem to be moving that quickly. Instead, it was as if the world was moving faster and we were slipping past it. We reached the hospital in a couple of minutes. Normally it would have taken 20 minutes, and that was if you sprinted all the way. How did you do that? I asked, sliding down. Speed is relative, he said, tugging his red cloak tight around his shoulders, pulling back into the shadows so he could not be seen, and that was all the answer he gave. Which room is your friend in? He asked. I told him Steve's room number. He looked up, counting windows, then nodded and told me to hop back up on his back. When I was in position, he walked over to the wall, took off his slippers, and laid his fingers and toes against the wall. Then he shoved his nails forward into the brick. He muttered. It is crumbly but it will hold us. Do not panic if we slip. I know how to land on my feet. It takes a very long fall to kill a vampire. Steve would have been flown or ridden in an ambulance to a newer hospital, which could handle his case. A hospital having crumbly walls sounds like it's old and small. He climbed up the wall, digging his nails in, moving a hand forward, then a foot, then the other hand and foot, one after the other. He moved quickly and within moments we were at Steve's window, crouching on the ledge, gazing in. I wasn't sure of the time, but it was very late. Nobody was in the room except for Steve. Mr. Krebsley tried the window. It was locked. Of course it's locked. It wouldn't surprise me that newer hospitals don't even have windows that open, because of a safety risk. He laid the fingers of one hand beside the glass covering the latch, then clicked the fingers of his other hand. The latch sprang open. He shoved the window up and stepped inside. I got down from his back. While he checked the door, I examined Steve. His breathing was more ragged than it had been, and there were new tubes all over his body, hooked up to menacing-looking machines. The poison has worked rapidly, Mr. Krebsley said, gazing down at him over my shoulder. We might be too late to save him. I felt my insides turn to ice at his words. Mr. Krebsley bent over and rolled up one of Steve's eyelids. For a few long seconds he stared at the eyeball and held Steve's right wrist. Finally he grunted. We are on time, he said, and I felt my heart lifting. But it is a good thing you did not wait any longer. A few more hours and he would have been a goner. I don't believe him. He would have been in an intensive care unit if he was unstable. The author only said that he was close to death, to make it more exciting. This is an overused trope. Just get on with it and cure him, I snapped, not wanting to know how close to death my best friend had come. Mr. Krebsley reached into one of his many pockets and produced a small glass vial. He turned on the bedside lamp and held the bottle up to the light to examine the serum. I must be careful, he told me. This antidote is almost as lethal as the poison. A couple of drops too many and... He didn't need to finish. He tilted Steve's head to one side and told me to hold it that way. He leaned one of his nails against the flesh of Steve's neck and made a small cut. Blood oozed out. He stuck his finger over it, then removed the cork of the bottle with his other hand. He lifted the vial to his mouth and prepared to drink. What are you doing? I asked. It must be passed on by mouth, he said. A doctor could inject it but I do not know about needles and the like. That's disgusting and cheesy. He could easily get a needle and do it anyways. I know that doing some injections are pretty easy. I have to inject myself once a month. He couldn't pass on a drug by mouth anyways in real life. Is that safe? I asked. Won't you pass on germs? Mr. Krebsley grinned. If you want to call a doctor, feel free, he said. Otherwise, have some faith in a man who was doing this long before your grandfather was born. A nurse would do the injection, not a doctor. He poured the serum into his mouth, then rolled it from side to side. He leaned forward and covered the cut with his lips. His cheeks bulged out, then in, as he blew the serum into Steve. Yeah, incredibly cheesy. In real life, this couldn't have happened. He probably would have poisoned himself too. He sat back when he was finished and wiped around his mouth. He spat the last of the fluid onto the floor. I am always afraid of swallowing that stuff by accident, he said. One of these nights, I'm going to take a course and learn how to do this the easy way. I was about to reply, but then Steve moved. His neck flexed, then his head, then his shoulders. His arms twitched and his legs started to jerk. His face creased up and he began to moan. What's happening? I asked, afraid that something had gone wrong. It is all right, Mr. Krebsley said, putting away the bottle. He was on the brink of death. The journey back is never a pleasant one. He will be in pain for some time, but he will live. Will there be any side effects? I asked. He won't be paralyzed from the waist down or anything? It sounds like he's asking about transverse myelitis. That's a potential possibility. No, Mr. Krebsley said. He will be fine. He will feel a bit stiff and will catch colds very easily, but otherwise he will be the same as he was before. If he is going to catch colds easily, he's going to catch more serious contagious diseases too. It sounds like his immune system will be suppressed. Steve's eyes shot open suddenly and focused on me and Mr. Krebsley. A puzzled look swept across his face and he tried speaking. But his mouth wouldn't work, and then his eyes went blank and closed again. Steve? I called, shaking him. Steve? That is going to happen a lot, Mr. Krebsley said. He will be slipping in and out of consciousness all night. By morning he should be awake, and by afternoon he will be sitting up and asking for dinner. Come, he said. Let us go. I want to stick around a while longer, to make sure he recovers, I replied. You mean you want to make sure I have not tricked you? Mr. Krebsley laughed. We will come back tomorrow, and you will see that he is fine. We really must go now. If we stay any. All of a sudden, the door opened and a nurse walked in. What's going on here? She shouted, stunned to see us. Who the hell are? Mr. Krebsley reacted quickly, grabbing Steve's bed covers and throwing them over the nurse. She fell down as she tried to duck from the sheets. Come, Mr. Krebsley hissed, rushing to the window. We have to leave immediately. I stared at the hand he was holding out, then at Steve, then at the nurse, then at the open door. Mr. Krebsley lowered his hand. I see, he said in a bleak voice. You are going to go back on our deal. I hesitated, opened my mouth to say something, then acting without thinking turned and made a dash for the door. I thought he would stop me, but he did nothing, only howled after me as I ran. Very well. Run, darn Shen. It will do no good. You are a creature of the night now. You are one of us. You will be back. You will come crawling on your knees, begging for help. Run, fool, run. And he began to laugh. His laughter followed me through the corridor, down the stairs, and out the front door. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I ran, expecting him to swoop down on me, but there was no sign of him on the way home, not a glimpse or a smell or a sound. Chapter 27. I acted surprised when Mom got off the phone that Monday morning and told me Steve had recovered. She was excited and did a little dance with me and Annie in the kitchen. He snapped out of it by himself? Dad asked. Yes, she said. The doctors can't understand it, but nobody's complaining. Incredible, Dad muttered. While Mom went off to see Mrs. Leonard, I started out for school. I was half afraid the sunlight would burn me when I left the house, but of course it didn't. Mr. Krebsley had told me I would be able to move around during the day. I wondered, from time to time, if it had been a bad dream. It seemed crazy, looking back. Deep down I knew it was real, but I tried believing otherwise. I went to visit Steve on Tuesday. He was sitting up, watching TV, eating a box of chocolates. He was delighted to see me, and told me about his stay in the hospital, the food, the games nurses brought him to play with, the presents that were piling up. I'll have to get bitten by poisonous spiders more often, he joked. I wouldn't make a habit of it if I were you, I told him. You might not get well next time. He studied me thoughtfully. You know, the doctors are baffled, he said. They don't know what made me sick, and they don't know how I recovered. You didn't tell them about Madame Atka? I asked. No, he said. There didn't seem much point. It would have meant trouble for you. Thanks. What happened to her? He asked. What did you do with her after she bit me? I killed her, I lied. I got mad and stomped her to death. Really? He asked. Really? He nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off me. When I first woke up, he said, I thought I saw you. I must have been mistaken, because it was the middle of the night. But it was a lifelike dream. I even thought I saw someone with you, tall, dressed in red, and with orange hair. I didn't say anything. I looked down at the floor and squeezed my hands together. Another funny thing, he said. The nurse who discovered me awake swore there were two people in the room, a man and a boy. Strange, though, isn't it? Very strange, I agreed, unable to look him in the eye. I began noticing changes in myself over the next couple of days. I found it hard getting to sleep when I went to bed and kept waking in the middle of the night. My hearing improved and I was able to hear people talking from far away. In school, I could listen to voices from the next two rooms, almost as if there were no walls between my class and theirs. I began to get in better shape. I was able to run around the yard during break and lunch without working up a sweat. Nobody could keep up with me. I was also more aware of my body and was able to control it. I could make a soccer ball do pretty much what I wanted, dribbling around opponents at will. I scored 16 goals on Thursday. I grew stronger, too. I was able to do push-ups and pull-ups now, as many as I like. There was a strength flowing through me that hadn't been there before. I had yet to test it properly, but I believed it might be immense. I tried hiding my new talents, but it was difficult. I explained away the running and soccer skills by saying I was exercising and practicing a lot more, but other things were trickier. When I was eating dinner at home that night, I wasn't concentrating. I could hear our next-door neighbors having a fight and I was listening to their argument. I was eating french fries and hot dogs, and after a while I noticed the food was tougher than it should have been. I glanced down and realized I'd bitten the head off the fork and was chewing it to pieces. Luckily, no one saw, and I was able to slip it into the wastebasket as I was washing up. Steve called that night. He'd been let out of the hospital. He was supposed to take things easy for a few days and not come to school until after the weekend, but he said he was going crazy with boredom and had persuaded his mother to let him come tomorrow. You mean you want to come to school? I asked, shocked. Sounds weird, doesn't it? He laughed. Normally I'm looking for an excuse to stay home. Yet now, when I have one, I want to go. But you don't know how dull it is being stuck indoors alone all the time. It was fun for a couple of days, but a whole week of it BRR. I thought of telling Steve the truth, but wasn't sure how he'd take it. He had wanted to become a vampire. I didn't think he'd like knowing Mr. Krebsley had picked me instead of him. And telling Eddie was out of the question. She hadn't mentioned Madame Octa since Steve recovered. Steve was the center of attention that Friday. The whole class crowded around and begged for his story. They wanted to know what had poisoned him, how he'd survived, what the hospital had been like, if they'd operated on him, if he had any scars, and so on. I don't know what bit me, he said. I was at Darren's house. I was sitting by the window. I heard a noise, but before I could look to see what it was, I got bitten and passed out. This was the story we had agreed upon when I went to visit him at the hospital. I felt stranger than ever that Friday. I spent the morning gazing around the classroom, feeling out of place. It seemed so pointless. I shouldn't be here, I kept thinking. I'm not a normal kid anymore. I should be out earning my living as a vampire's assistant. What good will English, history, and geography do me now? This isn't my scene. Tommy and Alan told Steve about my skills on the soccer field. He's running like the wind these days, Alan said. And playing like Pelé, Tommy added. Pelé is a Brazilian retired professional footballer. He retired in 1977. He played as a forward and is widely regarded as one of the greatest players of all time. Forwards are the players on the football team who play nearest to the opposing team's goal. Therefore, they are most responsible for scoring goals. Really? Steve asked, looking at me oddly. What's brought on the big change, Darren? There isn't any change, I lied. I'm just on a roll. I'm lucky. Listen to Mr. Modest. Tommy laughed. Mr. Dalton has said he might put him at forward for the under-17 soccer team. Imagine one of us playing for the under-17s. Nobody our age has ever made that team. No, Steve mused. They haven't. Aw, it's just Dalton talking, I said, trying to brush it aside. I played badly that lunchtime, on purpose. I could tell Steve was suspicious. I don't think he knew what was going on, but he sensed something was different about me. I ran slowly and missed chances I normally would have put away even without the special powers. My ploy worked. By the end of the game he'd stopped studying my every move and was beginning to joke with me again. But then something happened that ruined everything. Alan and me were running for the same ball. He shouldn't have been going for it, because I was closest. But Alan was a little younger than the rest of us and sometimes acted stupidly. I thought about pulling back but I was sick of playing badly. Lunch was almost over and I wanted to score at least one goal. So I decided, the hell with Alan Morris. That's my ball and if he gets in my way, tough. We clashed with each other just before reaching the ball. Alan gave a yell and went flying. I laughed, trapped the ball under my foot, and turned toward goal. The sight of blood stopped me in my tracks. Alan had landed awkwardly and cut his left knee. It was a bad gash and blood was welling up. He had started to cry, and was making no move to cover it with a tissue or scrap of cloth. Somebody picked the ball away from beneath my foot, and ran off with it. I took no notice. My eyes were focused on Alan. More specifically, on Alan's knee. More specifically still, on Alan's blood. I took a step toward him. Then another. I was standing over him now, blocking the light. He gazed up and must have seen something odd in my face, because he stopped crying and stared at me uneasily. I dropped to my knees and, before I knew what I was doing, I had covered the cut on his leg with my mouth, and was sucking out his blood and gulping it down. This went on for a few seconds. My eyes were closed and the blood filled my mouth. It tasted amazing. I'm not sure how much I would have drank, or how much harm I would have done to Alan. Luckily, I didn't get the chance to find out. I became aware of the people around me and opened my eyes. Nearly everyone had stopped playing, and was staring at me in horror. I removed my lips from Alan's knee, and looked around at my friends, wondering how to explain this. Then the solution hit me and I jumped up and spread my arms. I am the vampire lord. I yelled. I'm the king of the undead. I will suck the blood from all of you. They stared at me in shock, then laughed. They thought it was a joke. They thought I was only pretending to be a vampire. You're not, Shan, somebody said. That's gross. A girl squealed as fresh blood dripped down my chin. You should be locked away. The bell rang and it was time to return to class. I was feeling pleased with myself. I thought I'd fooled everybody. But then I noticed someone near the back of the crowd and my joy faded. It was Steve, and his dark face told me he knew exactly what had happened. He hadn't been fooled at all. He knew. This whole situation is stupid. I don't care about Steve. Is Alan going to turn into a vampire now? Chapter 28. I avoided Steve that evening and rushed straight home. I was confused. Why had I attacked Alan? I didn't want to drink anybody's blood. I hadn't been looking for a victim. So how come I jumped on him like a wild animal? And what if it happened again? And what if next time there was nobody around to stop me and I went on sucking until... No, it was a crazy thought. The sight of blood had taken me by surprise, it was all. I hadn't been expecting it. I would learn from this experience, and next time I'd be able to hold myself back. The taste of blood was still in my mouth, so I went to the bathroom and washed it out with several glasses of water, then brushed my teeth. The taste of blood doesn't stay in one's mouth for that long. The taste goes right away when the blood stops going down my esophagus from my bloody nose. I studied myself in the mirror. My face looked the same as ever. My teeth weren't any longer or sharper. My eyes and ears were the same. I had the same old body. No extra muscles, no added height, no fresh patches of hair. The only visible difference was in my nails, which had hardened and darkened. So why was I acting so strangely? I drew one of my nails along the glass of the mirror and it made a long deep scratch. I'll have to be careful of those, I thought to myself. My attack on Alan aside, I didn't appear to be too badly off. In fact, the more I thought about it, the less dreadful it seemed. Okay, it would take a long time to grow up, and I'd have to be careful if I saw fresh blood. Those were downers. But apart from that, life should be fine. I was stronger than anybody else my age, faster and fitter. I could become a sprinter or a boxer or a soccer player. Imagine, a vampire soccer player. I'd make millions. I'd be on TV talk shows, people would write books about me, a film would be made of my life, and I might be asked to make a song with a famous band. Or, my thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Who is it? I asked. Annie, came the reply. Are you finishing yet? I've been waiting forever to use the bathroom. Come in, I told her. I'm done. She entered. Admiring yourself in the mirror again? She asked. Of course. I grinned. Why shouldn't I? If I had a face like yours, I'd stay away from mirrors. She giggled. She had a towel wrapped around her. She turned on the bath faucets, and ran a hand under the water, to make sure it wasn't too hot. Then she sat on the edge of the tub and studied me. You look strange, she said. I don't, I said. Then, looking in the mirror, I asked, do I? Yeah, she said. I don't know what it is, but there's something different about you. You're just imagining things, I told her. I'm the same as I always was. No, she said, shaking her head. You're definitely. The tub began filling up, so she stopped speaking, and turned aside to turn off the faucets. As she was bending over, my eyes focused on the curve of her neck, and suddenly my mouth went dry. As I was saying, you look. She began, turning back around. She stopped when she saw my eyes. Darn? She asked nervously. Darn, what are? I raised my right hand and she went quiet. Her eyes widened and she stared silently at my fingers, as I waved them slowly from side to side, then around in small circles. I wasn't sure how I was doing it, but I was hypnotizing her. Come here, I growled, my voice deeper than normal. Annie rose and obeyed. She moved as if sleepwalking, eyes blank, arms and legs stiff. I hoped that her towel didn't drop off her body. When she stopped before me, I traced the outline of her neck with my fingers. I was breathing heavily, and seeing her as though through a misty cloud. My tongue slowly licked around my lips and my belly rumbled. The bathroom felt as hot as a furnace, and I could see beads of sweat rolling down Annie's face. I walked around the back of her, my hands never leaving her flesh. I could feel the veins throbbing as I stroked them, and when I pressed down on one near the bottom of her neck, I could see it standing out, blue and beautiful, begging to be ripped open and sucked dry. I bared my teeth and leaned forward, mouth wide open. At the last moment, as my lips touched her neck, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, and thankfully that was enough to make me pause. The face in the mirror was a twisted, unfamiliar mask, full of red eyes, sharp wrinkles, and a vicious grin. I lifted my head for a closer look. It was me, but at the same time it wasn't. It was like there were two people sharing one body, a normal human boy and a savage animal of the night. As I stared, the ugly face faded and the urge to drink blood passed. I gazed at Annie, horrified. I'd been about to bite her. I would have fed on my own sister. I fell away from her with a cry and covered my face with my hands, afraid of the mirror and what I might see. Annie staggered backward, then looked around the bathroom in a dazed way. What's going on? She asked. I feel weird. I came in for a bath, didn't I? Is it ready? Yes, I said softly. It's ready. I was ready, too. Ready to become a vampire. You're acting like a vampire in my opinion. However, I only know very little about them. I'll leave you alone, I said, and let myself out. I fell against the wall in the hall, where I spent a couple of minutes taking deep breaths, and trying to calm down. It couldn't be controlled. The thirst for blood was something I wouldn't be able to beat. I didn't even have to see spilled blood now. Just thinking of it had been enough to bring out the monster in me. I stumbled to my room and collapsed upon my bed. I cried as I lay there, because I knew my life, as a human, had come to an end. I could no longer live as plain old Darren Shen. The vampire in me could not be controlled. Sooner or later it would make me do something terrible, and I would end up killing Mom or Dad or Eddie. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. My life was no longer important, but those of my friends and family were. For their sakes, I would have to travel far away, to a place where I could do no harm. I waited for dark to fall, then let myself out. No hanging around this time until my parents fell asleep. I didn't dare, because I knew one of them would come to my room before going to bed. I could picture it, Mom bending over to kiss me goodnight, getting the shock of her life, as I bit into her neck. I didn't leave a note or take anything with me. I wasn't able to think about such things. All I knew was, I had to get out, the sooner the better. Anything that delayed my exit was bad. I walked quickly and was soon at the theater. It no longer looked scary. I was used to it. Besides, vampires have nothing to fear from dark, haunted buildings. Mr. Krebsley was waiting for me inside the front door. I heard you coming, he said. You lasted longer in the world of humans than I thought. I sucked blood from one of my best friends, I told him. And I almost bit my younger sister. You escaped lightly, he said. Many vampires kill someone close to them before realizing they are doomed. There's no way back, is there? I asked sadly. No magic potion to make me human again, or keep me from attacking people? The only thing that can stop you now, he said, is the good old stake through the heart. Very well, I sighed. I don't like it, but I guess I've got no other choice. I'm yours. I won't run away again. Do with me as you wish. He nodded slowly. You probably would not believe this, he said, but I know what you are going through and I feel sorry for you. He shook his head. But that is neither here nor there. We have work to do and cannot afford to waste time. Come, Doran-chan, he said, taking my hand. We have much to do before you can assume your rightful place as my assistant. Like what? I asked, confused. First of all, he said, with a sly smile, we have to kill you. Chapter 29. I spent my last weekend saying silent goodbyes. I visited every one of my favorite spots, library, swimming pool, cinema, parks, soccer field. I went to some of the places with Mom or Dad, some with Alan Morris or Tommy Jones. I would have liked to spend time with Steve but couldn't bear to face him. I treated every minute with my family and friends, as if it was special. I paid close attention to their faces and voices, so I would never forget. I knew I'd never see these people again, and that tore me apart inside, but it was the way it had to be. There was no going back. They could do nothing wrong that weekend. Mom's kisses didn't embarrass me, Dad's orders didn't bother me, Alan's stupid jokes didn't annoy me. I spent more time with Annie than with anybody else. I was going to miss her the most. I gave her piggyback rides and swung her around by the arms, and took her to the soccer field with me and Tommy. I even played with her dolls. Sometimes I felt like crying. I'd look at Mom or Dad or Annie, and realize how much I loved them, how empty my life would be without them. I had to turn aside at moments like that and take long, deep breaths. A couple of times that didn't work, and I rushed away to cry in private. I think they guessed something was wrong. Mom came into my room that Saturday night, and stayed for a long time, tucking me into bed, telling me stories, listening to me talk. It had been years since we'd spent time together like that. I felt sorry, after she'd gone, that we hadn't had more nights like this. In the morning, Dad asked if there was anything I wanted to discuss with him. He said I was a growing young man, and would be going through lots of changes, and he'd understand if I had mood swings, or wanted to go off by myself. But he would always be there for me to talk to. I kept quiet, nodded my head, and thanked him. I behaved as perfectly as possible. I wanted to leave a fine final impression, so they would remember me as a good son, a good brother, a good friend. I didn't want anybody thinking badly of me when I was gone. Dad was going to take us out to a restaurant for dinner that Sunday, but I asked if we could stay home to eat. This would be my last meal with them and I wanted it to be special. When I was looking back on it in later years, I wanted to be able to remember us together, at home, a happy family. Mom cooked my favorite food, chicken, roast potatoes, corn on the cob. Annie and I had freshly squeezed orange juice to drink. Mom and Dad shared a bottle of wine. We had strawberry cheesecake for dessert. Everybody was in a good mood. We sang songs. Dad cracked terrible jokes. Mom played a tune with a pair of spoons. Annie recited a few poems. Everybody joined in for a game of charades. It was a day I wished would never end. But, of course, all days must, and finally, as it always does, the sun dropped and the darkness of night crept across the sky. Dad looked up after a while, then at his watch. Time for bed, he said. You two have school in the morning. No, I thought, I don't have school ever again. That should have cheered me up, but all I could think was, no school means no Mr. Dalton, no friends, no soccer, no school trips. I delayed going to bed as long as I could. I spent forever taking off my clothes, and putting on my pajamas, longer still washing my hands and face and brushing my teeth. Then, when it could be avoided no longer, I went downstairs to the living room, where Mom and Dad were talking. They looked up, surprised to see me. Are you all right, Daron? Mom asked. I'm fine, I said. You're not feeling sick? I'm fine, I assured her. I just wanted to say goodnight. I put my arms around Dad, then kissed him on the cheek. Next I did the same with Mom. Good night, I said to each. This is one for the books. Dad laughed, rubbing his cheek, where I had kissed him. How long since he kissed the two of us goodnight, Angie? Too long. Mom smiled, patting my head. I love you, I told them. I know I haven't said it very often, but I do. I love both of you and always will. We love you, too, Mom said. Don't we, Dermate? Of course we do, Dad said. Well, tell him, she insisted. Dad sighed. I love you, Daron, he said, rolling his eyes in a way he knew would make me laugh. Then he gave me a hug. Really I do, he said, serious this time. I left them then. I stood outside the door a while, listening to them talk, reluctant to depart. What do you think brought it on? Mom asked. Kids, Dad snorted. Who knows how their minds work? There's something up, Mom said. He's been acting oddly for some time now. Maybe he's got a girlfriend, Dad suggested. I lingered long enough. I was afraid that if I waited any longer, I might rush into the room and tell them what was really the matter. If I did, they'd stop me from going ahead with Mr. Krebsley's plan. They'd say that vampires weren't real and fight to keep me with them, in spite of the danger. I thought of Annie and how close I'd come to biting her and knew I must not let them stop me. I trudged upstairs to my room. It was a warm night and the window was open. It was important. Mr. Krebsley was waiting in the closet. He emerged when he heard me closing the door. It is stuffy in there, he complained. I feel sorry for Madame Matka, having had to spend so much time in. Shut up, I told him. No need to be rude, he sniffed. I was merely making a comment. Well, don't, I said. You might not think much of this place but I do. This has been my home, my room, my closet, ever since I can remember. And I'm never going to see it again after tonight. This is my last little while here. So don't badmouth it, all right? I'm sorry, he said. I took one long last look around the room, then sighed unhappily. I pulled a bag out from underneath the bed and handed it to Mr. Krebsley. What is this? He asked suspiciously. Some personal stuff, I told him. My diary. A picture of my family. A couple of other things. Nothing that will be missed. Will you watch it for me? Yes, he said. But only if you promise not to look through it, I said. Vampires have no secrets from each other, he said. But, when he saw my face, he shrugged. I will not open it, he promised. All right, I said, taking a deep breath. Do you have the potion? He nodded and handed over a small dark bottle. I looked inside. The liquid was dark and thick and foul-smelling. Mr. Krebsley moved behind me and laid his hands on my neck. You're sure this will work? I asked nervously. Trust me, he said. I always thought a broken neck meant people couldn't walk or move, I said. No, he replied. The bones of the neck do not matter. Paralysis only happens if the spinal cord severs. I will be careful not to damage it. Won't the doctors think it's strange? I asked. They will not check, he said. The potion will slow your heart down so much, they will be sure you are dead. They will find the broken neck and put two and two together. If you were older, they might go ahead with an autopsy. But no doctor likes cutting a child open. Now, are you totally clear on what is going to happen and how you must act? He asked. Yes, I said. There must be no mistakes, he warned. If you make just one slip, our plans will fall apart. I'm not a fool. I know what to do. I snapped. Then do it, he said. So I did. With one angry gesture, I swallowed the contents of the bottle. I grimaced at the taste, then shuddered as my body started to stiffen. There wasn't much pain, but an icy feeling spread through my bones and veins. My teeth began to chatter. It took about 10 minutes for the poison to work its deadly charms. At the end of that time, I couldn't move any of my limbs. My lungs weren't working well. They were, but very, very slowly, and my heart had stopped again, not fully, but enough for its beat to be undetectable. I'm going to snap the neck now, Mr. Krebsley said, and I heard a quick clicking sound as he jerked my head to one side. I couldn't feel anything. My senses were dead. There, he said. That should do it. Now I am going to throw you out of the window. He carried me over and stood there a moment with me, breathing in the night air. I have to throw you hard enough to make it look genuine, he said. You might break some bones in the fall. They will start hurting when the potion wears off after a few days, but I will fix them up later on. Here we go. He picked me up, paused a moment, then hurled me out and down. I fell quickly, the house whizzing past in a blur, and landed heavily on my back. My eyes were open, and I found myself staring at a drain at the foot of the house. For a while my body went undetected, so I lay there, listening to the sounds of the night. In the end, a passing neighbor spotted me and investigated. I couldn't see his face, but I heard his gasp when he turned me over and saw my lifeless body. He rushed straight around to the front of the house and pounded on the door. I could hear his voice as he shouted for my mother and father. Then their voices as he led them around back. They thought he was pulling their leg or had been mistaken. My father was marching angrily and muttering to himself. The neighbor should have told the parents to call 911 and start a chest compressions. No one knows how to do CPR or first aid in this book. The footsteps stopped when they rounded the bend and saw me. For a long, terrible moment there was complete silence. Then Dad and Mom rushed forward and picked me up. Darn. Mom screamed, clutching me to her chest. Let go, Angie, Dad shouted, prying me free and laying me down on the grass. What's wrong with him, Dermot? Mom wailed. I don't know. He must have fallen. Dad stood and gazed up at my open bedroom window. I could see his hands flexing into fists. He's not moving, Mom said calmly, then grabbed me and shook me fiercely. He's not moving. She screamed. He's not moving. Dad once again eased her hands away. He beckoned our neighbor over and handed Mom to him. Take her inside, he said softly. Call for an ambulance. I'll stay here and look after Darren. Is he dead? Our neighbor asked. Mom moaned loudly when he said it and buried her face in her hands. Dad shook his head softly. No, he said, giving Mom's shoulder a light squeeze. He's just paralyzed, like his friend was. Mom lowered her hands. Like Steve? She asked half hopefully. Yes. Dad smiled. And he'll snap out of it like Steve. Now go call for help, okay? Mom nodded, then hurried away with our neighbor. Dad held his smile until she was out of sight, then bent over me, checked my eyes, and felt my wrist for a pulse. When he found no sign of life, he laid me back down, brushed a lock of hair out of my eyes, then did something I'd never expected to see. He started to cry. And that was how I came to enter a new, miserable phase of my life, namely death. Chapter 30. It didn't take the doctors long to pronounce their verdict. They couldn't find any breath or pulse or movement. It was an open and shut case as far as they were concerned. The worst thing was knowing what was going on around me. I wished that I'd asked Mr. Krebsley to give me another potion, which could have put me to sleep. It was terrible, hearing Mom and Dad crying, and he screaming for me to come back. The doctors would have seen brain activity. The big question whether they could have started his heart back up first. Then, if he was stable enough, they would have looked for any brain activity. It doesn't make sense for him to be conscious, since there isn't any blood going to his brain. If he was really dead, it would make sense for him to be unconscious. Then, he can be resurrected, when it was safe to do so. Friends of the family began arriving after a couple of hours, the queue for more sobbing and moans. I'd have loved to avoid this. I would have rather run away with Mr. Krebsley in the middle of the night, but he'd told me that wasn't possible. If you run away, he'd said, they would follow. There would be posters up everywhere, pictures in the papers and with the police. We would know no peace. Not necessarily. Both of them move outside the European Union or the United States depending on where he was born. Both of them could move to a third world country and hide. If he fakes his death, how is he going to move throughout the country? It makes sense just to leave instead. Faking my death was the only way. If they thought I was dead, I'd be free. Nobody comes searching for a dead person. Now, as I heard the sadness, I cursed both Mr. Krebsley and myself. I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have put them through this. Still, looking on the bright side, at least this would be the end of it. They were sad, and would be for some time, but they would get over it eventually, I hoped. If I'd run away, the misery could have lasted forever. They might have lived the rest of their lives hoping I'd come back, searching, believing I would one day return. The undertaker arrived and cleared the room of visitors. He and a nurse undressed me and examined my body. Some of my senses were returning, and I could feel his cold hands prodding and poking me. The undertaker wouldn't do that at the hospital. The undertaker would take him to a funeral home. He's in excellent condition, he said softly to the nurse. Firm, fresh, and unmarked. I'll have very little to do with this one. Just some rouge to make him look a little red around the cheeks. A respectful undertaker wouldn't say that to the nurse. He rolled up my eyelids. He was a chubby, happy-looking man. I was afraid he'd spot life in my eyes, but he didn't. All he did was roll my head gently from side to side, which made the broken bones in my neck creak. So fragile a creature is man, he sighed, then went ahead with the rest of the examination. They took me back home that night and laid me in the living room on a long table with a large cloth spread across it so people could come and say goodbye. It was weird, hearing all those people discussing me as though I wasn't there, talking about my life and what I'd been like as a baby and how fine a boy I was, and what a good man I would have grown up to be if I lived. If he was my son, I would have had an autopsy done on him. It would have bothered me for the rest of my life if I didn't do that for my previously healthy child. What a shock they'd have gotten if I leapt up and shouted, "Boo!" Time dragged. I don't think I can explain how boring it was to lie still for hours on end, unable to move or laugh or scratch my nose. I couldn't even stare at the ceiling because my eyes were shut. I had to be careful as feelings returned to my body. Mr. Krebsley had told me this would happen, that tingles and itches would start long before I fully recovered. I couldn't move, but if I'd made a real effort, I could have twigged a little, which might have given me away. The itches nearly drove me crazy. I tried ignoring them, but it was impossible. They were everywhere, scampering up and down my body like tiny spiders. They were worse around my head and neck, where the bones had snapped. People finally began leaving. It must have been late, because soon the room was empty and totally silent. I lay there by myself for a time, enjoying the quiet. And then I heard a noise. The door to the room opened, very slowly and very quietly. Footsteps crossed the room and stopped by the table. My insides went cold, and it wasn't because of the potion. Who was here? For a moment I thought it might be Mr. Krebsley, but he had no reason to come creeping into the house. We were set to meet at a later date. Whoever it was, he or she was keeping very quiet. For a couple of minutes there was no sound at all. Then I felt hands on my face. He raised my eyelids and shined a small flashlight onto my pupils. The room was too dark for me to see who he was. He grunted, lowered the lids, then pried open my mouth and laid something on my tongue. It felt like a piece of thin paper, but it had a strange, bitter taste. After removing the object from my mouth, he picked up my hands and examined the fingertips. Next there was the sound of a camera taking photos. Finally he stuck a sharp object that felt like a needle into me. He was careful not to prick me in places where I would bleed, and stayed away from my vital organs. He wouldn't bleed at all, because his heart isn't moving his blood around his body. My senses had partially returned, but not fully, so the needle didn't cause much pain. After that, he left. I heard his footsteps crossing the room, as quietly as before, then the door opening and closing, and that was that. The visitor, whoever it had been, was gone, leaving me puzzled and a little bit scared. Why would he be scared? He's dead. Nobody can hurt him. It was probably Steve, knowing the author and this story. Early the next morning, Dad came in and sat with me. He spoke for a long time, telling me all the things he had planned for me, the college I would have gone to, the job he wanted for me. He cried a lot. Toward the end, Mom came in and sat with him. They cried on each other's shoulders, and tried to comfort themselves. They said they still had Annie, and could maybe have another child or adopt one. At least it had been quick and I hadn't been in pain. And they would always have their memories. I hated being the cause of so much hurt. I would have given anything in the world to spare them this. There was a lot of activity later that day. A coffin was brought in and I was laid inside. A priest came and sat with the family and their friends. People streamed in and out of the room. I heard Annie crying, begging me to stop fooling and sit up. It would have been much easier if they'd taken her away, but I guess they didn't want her to grow up feeling they robbed her of her chance to say goodbye to her brother. Finally, the lid was placed on the coffin and screwed into place. I was lifted off the table and led out to the hearse. I am totally convinced that he's dead, because he would have suffocated in the coffin. I am sure that the author made him conscious, while dead, to make the story more interesting, and to move the plot along. We drove slowly to church, where I couldn't hear much of what was being said. Then, with Mass out of the way, they carried me to the graveyard, where I could hear every word of the priest's speech and the sobs and moans of the mourners. And then they buried me.